Hello everyone, and welcome back to Corndog Creates. In today's video, I wanted to do something with this pack of clay pots that I found at the dollar store, so I decided to take a stab at working with clay for the first time. So I opened them up and grabbed a couple more things that I'll need for this project. The idea that I had in mind for this project was to make some cute little fantasy plants from clay to go inside of my little pots. The first thing I wanted to do was fill up some of the empty space at the bottom of the pots by balling up some aluminum foil and pressing it down into the pots. Next, I took some white clay and worked each piece around for a few minutes to soften it up and make it a little more workable. The clay kept wanting to stick to my mat, so I threw down some cornstarch to help prevent that from happening. Once I had the clay how I needed it, I pressed the clay down into the pots to fill the extra space on top. Next, I took some more clay and flattened it out into a sheet with a rolling pin and balled up some foil to the shape I wanted. Then it was a matter of wrapping the clay around the foil and tearing off the excess, followed by pressing and molding until it's one solid shape and there aren't any cracks or holes. Then it was time to make the petals for this little lady. So I flattened out some more clay and used a small cookie cutter in the shape of a water drop. Then I cut all of the tips off so that they were flat on the ends and started adding them to my plant in 2 rows around the body, about 2/3 of the way around, using my fingers and a silicone tip brush. For the flowers on her, I used 2 more of the cookie cutters to cut a few more pieces and a ball stylus to form them upwards into a bowl shape. Then I used my X-Acto knife to scratch up the surface of the clay on the inside of the bigger piece and the underside of the smaller piece. And adding a little water as a binder, I used a ball stylus to press them together until it resembled an interesting flower shape. Once everything was ready to assemble, I used the same process to add the plant to the pot as before with some cuts and some water, before using some strips of clay around the bottom to blend it in with the clay inside of the pot. Once I got here, I realized I didn't do the inside of the flowers, so I made a few balls of clay and pressed them into the center and used a silicone shaper to mold them into the sides of the flower. Then I used a small ball stylus to push some holes into them to give them an interesting look. Once that was done, I could add them to the top. Next, I took some eyes that I pre-baked and marked where I wanted them to be on the face and carved out some of the clay to make room. When they were somewhat set, I used a couple worms of clay around the edges to help blend them into the body. Now it's time to add a little mouth hole so that the little lady can breathe, so I carved out a triangular shape and formed it out with some tools. And after some more blending and adding some more texture, this was the final result. I think she turned out pretty adorable. But I don't want to end the video there, so let's make her a couple frames to hang out with, shall we? For my second little plant, I made him the exact same way that I made the first one, but I wanted him to have more of a mushroom shape. I knew he had the potential to be top heavy, so I used some thick gauge wire inside to give it some stability. I ended up not putting him directly into a pot and left 2 prongs on the bottom so that I could add him to the pot after baking everything. Once I had the basic shape that I wanted, I added a couple warts of clay randomly around the body. This guy was inspired by cacti, so I baked some little spikes and coated the ends with bacon bond before pressing them into the mounds that I just made and blending them in. Next, I wanted this guy to have a flower on his head as well, but I wanted it to be bigger, so I took a cutter that was shaped like a spade and cut some pieces out and cut off the tips. Next, I layered them on top of one another and blended them into a small ball of clay in the center. Then I added it to the top of his head before adding some clay inside to create the pollen area. After making this spiky little guy, I realized that I should have probably put the eyes in first, but I didn't think that far ahead, so I had to maneuver carefully so that I didn't knock the spikes out while carving and molding them into place. This guy wasn't having too good of a day, so he has a scowl on his face. Maybe if he wasn't always putting up a defense, he'd have a good time. For the final plant, I wanted something a little more goofy looking. So I rolled up a potato-shaped ball of foil and covered it in clay before giving him a base of clay so that he could stand up on my table without falling over. Then I did the same flower making process from the first one, but with a star shape this time. For the eyes on this guy, I just used a couple small balls of clay instead of pre-baked ones like the other two, and then gave him a derpy looking mouth. Now, to add some character to this guy, I decided to give him some plant tentacles. So I rolled some clay around some thin gauge wire before adding them to the body and bending them into different shapes. After everything was baked, these were the results for all of my little friends. My little cactus boy was indeed top heavy, so I drilled 2 holes into the base with a drill and glued him into place before moving forward. For the painting, I ended up using my airbrush for the initial coat of paint. For my cactus friend, I gave him a coat of dark green before giving him a sprinkle of a lighter green. For my tentacled friend, I gave him a coat of a light blue followed by a coat of a darker blue. And lastly, my little lass got a coat of yellow and a coat of orange. For the flowers, I gave the insides a couple coats of yellow, using a heat gun between coats to speed up the drying process. For the little orange plant, yellow wasn't a great idea, so I decided to give hers a coat of white paint. Since I was already using the white paint, I went ahead and painted in the eyes of all of the plants. Now is probably a great time to stress that I'm not a great painter by any means. I like to make things that are interesting and fun, so I'm not worried about perfection. As long as it looks how I want it to look, that's all that matters. Now, back to the flowers. For my green guy, I decided to go with a pink color for his flower. I thought it would be ironic to have a bright, colorful pink color for the flower on the one guy who looks like he's not so cheerful. For the orange plant, I wanted to give the inside of her flowers a red color while giving the outer petals a light dry brush around the edges. I also did the same with the petals around the body as well. Lastly, I gave the blue plant's flowers a coat of a light purple color. For all of their mouths, I gave them all light coats of red, pink, and blue to give them a nice gummy color. And lastly, they all got black dots for the center of their eyes. Well, maybe not in the center. To give all of the plants a soil-looking base, I mixed spackle with Mod Podge and brown paint and used the mixture to spread around the bottom of all of the pots and let them sit overnight to fully dry. Once they were dry, I mixed up a brown wash and gave them all a coat, making sure to wipe off all of the excess with a paper towel so that the wash only settles into the deeper parts of the plants. Then I gave them all a dry brush of their original colors to highlight the edges and tips. And there you have it, a couple plant friends for my bookshelf. Thank you guys so much for coming in to watch the video. I hope you all enjoyed it and come back to join me in the next one. If you did like it, make sure to give it a thumbs up because it really helps me out. Also, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you can see when all of my future videos come out. If any of you are interested, I have a Discord channel that I made so that you guys can have a place to chat with me and each other and also be able to make suggestions for future builds. Link will be in the description for anyone who wants to join. Thank you all for watching. My name is Corndog, and see you all in the next video.